Welcome to the Good for America podcast. I'm your host, former Congressman Bob Good, former chairman of the House Freedom Caucus. Thanks for joining the podcast. Please remember to subscribe to the show, to rate the show, refer it to your friends, and follow me on social media at Rep Bob Good. So we're in the midst of what will be the longest government shutdown in history. Will the Democrats end it after the elections, after trying to capitalize on it, particularly with disgruntled federal workers in Virginia? Have Democrats held out just to make sure they get past this election season when surely some federal workers in Virginia in particular, where this is the greatest percentage of federal workers versus any state, where these furloughed federal workers will be particularly motivated, incentivized to vote, or even the ones that are working without getting a paycheck? Or if the Democrats do unexpectedly well in the elections, God forbid, let's pray that doesn't happen, but will they be emboldened to try to use that as leverage and hold out for an even better deal or even more concessions than they're already asking from Republicans? And for that matter, if the elections don't go well for Republicans, how will Republicans respond? How will they respond to reopening the government and the Democrat demands for more borrowing and spending in exchange? The truth is, the Schumer shutdown doesn't truly directly affect most Americans' daily lives. The exceptions, of course, would be if you're one of the aforementioned federal workers, or someone in your family is a federal worker who's impacted by the shutdown, or perhaps if you're an air traveler. But who else, other than those who are dependent on the federal government for a welfare check or food stamps or housing subsidies or something else that's being delayed as a result of the shutdown, who else is impacted by the government shutdown? The truth is that many Americans are finding out the government is not as essential as perhaps they thought, that most Americans don't even miss the federal government not being in full operation. And so Republicans need to utilize that again to capitalize on it and to reduce government, to cut spending, and not cave to the Democrat demands. And while Republicans don't have the moral or policy high ground with respect to the continuing resolution, again, it is a Democrat CR, the Democrat continuing resolution. It is an extension of Biden's bloated, wasteful, massive COVID budget. That's what the CR is. The Republican passed CR from back on September 18 or 19 when it was passed is an extension of Biden's COVID budget. So Republicans don't have the moral or policy high ground with respect to the budget that the House passed and that the Democrats are refusing to pass in the Senate, but they do have the strategic or procedural high ground because it is the Schumer shutdown. Republicans did, you could argue, the best bad thing they could do, retaining and extending Biden's COVID budget. There's other things they could do worse, borrowing and spending more, caving to Democrat demands. So again, you could argue that Republicans did the best bad thing they could do when they simply extended the Democrat COVID budget in the House. And it's Democrats who shut down the government by refusing to pass it in the Senate, by refusing to provide the necessary 60 votes. Republicans only have 53 votes in the Senate, so they cannot end a Democrat filibuster without 60 votes. And there's been 3 Democrats who voted for it. They need 7 or 8 Democrats to join the Republicans in passing the CR if they want to reopen the government. It's Democrats, make no mistake about it, in the Senate who are preventing federal employees from being paid. Military, Homeland Security, TSA, everyone else. It's Democrats who are preventing the distribution of food stamps and other federal benefits and welfare services and so forth. And again, so it'll take 7 or 8 of the 47 Democrats to vote yes to pass the House CR and to reopen the government. Now, by the way, that CR, that Democrat CR that the Republicans passed in the House back in September 18 and 19, that expires on November 20. It was intended to be a 60-day CR. And so now it expires 2 weeks from now, essentially. And so the time frame is really crunched, even if the Senate passed it today, because it's no longer a 60-day CR. It would be, in effect, a 2-week CR. The idea, supposedly, was to use that time period from September 20 to November 20, roughly, to pass the 12 appropriation bills or to negotiate a longer term extension of the funding of the federal government. Again, the fiscal year expired on September 30. Republicans and Democrats are supposed to be passing a funding of the government till September 30 of next year. Supposed to be 12 individual spending bills. Congress has failed to do that again, as they have every year since 1997. So it was intended to be a 60-day deal, and the plan again was to come back in October, November, and pass something before November 20 when it expired. It would have almost certainly been with more spending based on history, including, sadly and unfortunately, the last 10 months since Republicans have had full control of government, because the $2 trillion annual deficit has just been perpetuated by Republicans. But the plan, the funding of the government until November 20 was to use the calendar on the eve of Thanksgiving when members want to go home to pressure more spending, more government, because obviously you can't shut the government down again on November 20, and everyone's going to want to go home for Thanksgiving. So that's by design. The CR that the Senate is trying to pass is expiring November 20 anyway. And so look for a bad spending deal to come by the end of the year, whether it's by November 20, even if the Senate passed the CR, whether it's before Christmas, because they are liable to come back in November, later this month in November, and pass a deal to the eve of Christmas and then do something even worse at that time. That's what Congress does, Republicans and Democrats. And we talked a lot about this, the funding deadlines, that September 30 funding deadline that was approaching back over the summer, when Republicans were focused on the big bill, that, hey, they're not working on the 12 individual spending bills that are due by September 30, and they're almost certainly going to do a CR, an omnibus. And unfortunately, that has come to pass. And here we are today talking about a CR and perpetuating again the Democrat budget. Republicans did not do their job over the summer, and now for almost every Republican is voting for what they refused to support last year and in previous years, which is Biden's budget. That's what we've come to. Republicans, again, are doing the best bad thing they can do by not increasing spending, but they're also not decreasing or cutting it. They're keeping in place the Democrat budget. Biden's bloated, egregious COVID budget in this continuing resolution, or CR. Worse yet, though, the risk is that Republicans will cave and make a deal on the Obamacare subsidies in order to reopen the government. That's what Democrats are demanding. They're saying that they're not going to vote to reopen the government in the Senate unless Republicans cancel the very modest Medicaid cuts that were in the big bill that don't even go into effect for a few years, which would cost $1 trillion, and they want to continue the Obamacare subsidies that are set to expire December 31. That'd be another $500 billion. Democrats are wanting $1.5 trillion in more borrowing spending in exchange for opening the government. Republicans cannot cave to this. The Obamacare subsidies themselves are giving taxpayer-funded free health insurance for people making up to $150,000, and reduced or subsidized premiums, health insurance premiums, for those making up to $600,000. Biden greatly expanded this, did this during COVID in the name of COVID. Democrats passed it without any Republican votes. Republicans shouldn't vote for it now. Let them expire, which would simply mean that you would go back to the subsidized levels from pre-COVID. So somebody who's getting has to pay 10% of the cost of insurance would have to pay like 20% if they were to expire. Obamacare is bad insurance. It's expensive insurance that nobody would buy on their own, and that's why it has to be subsidized. And 40% of the people who were added to the subsidies during COVID by Biden didn't even use it last year. They had no claims. They had no prescriptions filled. They had no doctor's visits. It just is taxpayer-funded premiums paid to insurance companies under what is called, again, Obamacare. So Republicans have to refuse to do anything worse than what they've already done, which is passing Biden's budget in this CR, the continuing resolution. Republicans have to refuse to change it and make it worse, or to promise to do so in exchange for opening the government, whether it's by November 20 or to do, or whatever they agree to fund the government till the end of the year, or through the end of the fiscal year, which is September 30th of next year. Republicans need to hold strong and use the time to actually cut spending, reduce government, do what they told the American people they would do. And that said, the current budget situation, the fiscal situation combined with this week's elections, it's appropriate or relevant to ask, what are the Republican Party's red lines? Once again, what are the Republican Party's sacred policies and principles? What are the non-negotiables? What is worth fighting for, or even to risk losing an election for? And what can and should drive Republican turnout in elections, inspiring passion and enthusiasm for Republican candidates, besides just the fact that they're not as bad as Democrats or they're not Democrats? Can you think of anything? Certainly, it's not, as we've talked so many times, the spending or the fiscal issues. Again, just look at the current and expected government funding packages, which are keeping the Democrat policies and spending levels in place and running a $2 trillion annual deficit. Seems like we just talked about $37 trillion in debt, and we reached $38 trillion so quickly, the fastest ever the debt to go up by $1 trillion outside of COVID. And Republicans will run on over $40 trillion in debt in the midterms next year. Republicans, certainly you couldn't say that their non-negotiables or their sacred policies are, being against big government or constitutional limits. Too many Republicans accept government as the nanny, as the caretaker, as the provider. And here in Virginia, you've got Republican members of Congress like Jen Kiggans in Virginia 2 or Rob Whitman in Virginia 1 calling on an extension of the Obamacare subsidies. So these are Republicans who are calling on an extension of the Obamacare subsidies that we've been talking about. You certainly can't say that Republicans' red lines or non-negotiables or principles are the moral issues, the life issue or the LGBT issues or marriage issues or moral issues. Republicans have long surrendered and abandoned those. You could make the case that Republicans' principles or non-negotiables are a strong America, a strong military, a strong national defense, and a secure America, the border security and those sorts of things. But Republicans' ability to deliver on those is greatly imperiled by the fiscal crisis, the fiscal failures, the refusal to address the spending issues. That's why we as conservatives should be loyal to policy and principle, not to party, personality, or politician. Conservatives, true constitutional conservatives, should be loyal to policy and principle, not party, not individual personality, or any particular politician. We cannot have blind loyalty or allegiance, again, to a party, to a personality, or to a politician. Instead, our political loyalty should be to our principles, our biblical principles, constitutional principles, conservative principles, patriotic principles, and true America First principles. And we should have the courage to defend those principles consistently, unapologetically, irrespective of who we're talking about. Right is right, no matter who does it or doesn't do it. Wrong is wrong, no matter who does it or doesn't do it. And that's our responsibility in keeping the republic, being loyal to policy and principle, not to party, personality, or politician. And that said, on the other hand, what has this mentality of voting for the lesser of two evils gotten us? Republicans so often are voting for the lesser of two evils, whether it's the Republican Party as a lesser of two evils compared to the Democrat, or an individual particular Republican nominee who's not as bad as the Democrat. This willingness to support any Republican just because they're not a Democrat. Where has that gotten us? Where has it gotten us to support any Republican just because the Democrat Party is worse? Moderates, rhinos, most Republicans, sadly, are simply slowing down the train that's taking the country off the cliff, whether you're talking about morally or fiscally or otherwise. But the destination is still the same if you're just slowing down the train. For that matter, a moderate is essentially a house built on sand with no foundation. It doesn't stand for anything. It's totally susceptible or vulnerable to the changes in the political weather. the inevitable storms of life and of politics, a moderate has no rock on which to stand, no foundation to withstand the storms of life. Worse yet, today you've got so many applying the lesser of two evils to the New York City mayoral race, the New York City mayoral election, the lesser of two evils. You've got some Republicans and some so-called conservatives calling for the Republican nominee, Sliwa, to drop out and for Republicans to vote for Cuomo, Andrew Cuomo, because allegedly or substantively Mamdani is worse than Cuomo, supposedly. Who would have predicted that it would come to this? How did it get to this point where the lesser of two evils mentality applies to Andrew Cuomo? Vote for Andrew Cuomo in New York City instead of Mamdani because Mamdani is supposedly worse. If Cuomo were somehow able to win, who do you think he would try to appease or cater to? Would it be the Mamdani voters or naive, gullible Republicans who voted for him? I suspect he would be catering to the extreme left of the party, as all Democrats do, not for the Republicans who voted for him. I say let Mamdani be the face of the Democrat Party, pull the Band-Aid off, let the Dems defend and run on the communists next year. Have we forgotten who and what Andrew Cuomo is? Pretending that he's a moderate? I mean, by what standard or what policies is Andrew Cuomo a moderate, or is he a reasonable Democrat? By what? Based on his history. He was one of the worst governors in the country, and he resigned in shame in New York. Have we forgotten what he did during COVID? And of course, forgetting about what Cuomo did in COVID is consistent with there being no accountability this year for what Democrats did in the federal government during COVID. We don't have hearings going on for COVID, what the government did to us. There's been no criminal referrals from Congress, no arrest of anyone by our DOJ, not for these government officials or the medical establishment or the big tech or media, those who lied to us, those who suppressed the truth, those who trampled on our constitutional freedoms. There's been no accountability. And I will remind you that it was President Trump who kept Fauci. It was President Trump who kept Deborah Birx. It was President Trump who shut down the country, who criticized Ron DeSantis for reopening the country. It was President Trump who gave us warp speed and the liability and immunity protections for big pharma, these companies that came out with the vaccines. So just think about that one when you think about voting for Andrew Cuomo. The fact is, we cannot count on government or those in power to keep the republic. It's our responsibility. We cannot count on government or those in power to keep the republic. It's our responsibility. We can't count on government and those in power to protect our constitutional freedoms, our God-given fundamental rights. It's up to us. There is no plan B. It's the people. It's only through the people, the consent of the governed, that government gets its legitimate power. And government's job is to protect the rights, the God-given rights that belong to us as a people. But the founders understood that the constitutional republic depended upon us and that it depended upon, again, the people, a population, a moral and religious population that would hold to biblical principles, our God-given unalienable rights, respect for life, liberty, and property. Property, once again, being keeping the fruit of your labor. That which you work for belongs to you. That is an unalienable right, the right to life, liberty, and property. The founders knew that keeping the republic depended on a moral and religious population, an educated and informed population, meaning educated and informed by yourself, by being a student of our history, of our Constitution, of our founding documents, our founding principles, the true history of America. Being educated and informed by your family, by your church, not necessarily formal education. That's not necessarily what the founders were intending. Formal education is fine, but that we would be an educated, informed citizenry about our Constitution, our founding principles, our true history. That keeping the republic was dependent on us knowing and respecting our Constitution, our values and our history, and again, our founding documents and our founders themselves. The founders also knew that in addition to being we needed to be a moral and religious population and an educated, informed population, but also an engaged and participating population. That means people voting, people engaging in the political process, advocating for candidates and conservative principles and policies, influencing others, speaking out, using your influence to help others, and holding accountable our elected officials, our government officials, those who represent us. You could argue we don't have any of those today, and the country is suffering as a result that we're not a moral and religious population. We're not an educated, informed population. We're not an engaged and participating population. That's why the country is in the shape that it's in. That is why Democrats win. No Democrat could win if we had a moral and religious population, if we had an educated, informed population, if we had an engaged and participating population. But this is how incumbents are reelected more than 90% of the time, despite their horrible performance and their terrible approval ratings. This is why primary challenges fail when you have a Republican primary to try to get rid of a moderate rhino Republican who lets us down, who fails us, or we don't have a primary challenge. It's because of a failure for us to hold our government officials accountable. This is why the uniparty swamp cartel spends us into insolvency, spends us into bankruptcy. This is how we get to $38 trillion in debt and $2 trillion annual deficits, because we're not holding accountable our government officials, our elected representatives. This is why both parties get away with embracing and sustaining and expanding big government. And this is why politicians who are focused solely on reelection, that's their number one priority, to stay in Washington, to stay in Richmond, to stay in elected office. That's how they thrive, is because we don't have a moral and religious citizenry, an engaged and participating citizenry, an educated and informed citizenry. We're not checking or challenging the powers that threaten our First Amendment rights, our Second Amendment rights. And the fact is, a third or so of eligible voters don't participate. They don't vote. In red areas, vote in lesser numbers percentage-wise than blue areas. So we're getting the government that we deserved because there's so many Americans who are uninformed or apathetic to what's happening. So many are ignorant as to what's happening, ignorant to our history, ignorant to our Constitution. Or so many vote for Santa Claus. The Democrats run as Santa Claus. Mom Donnie in New York City running as Santa Claus, promising goodies, promising free stuff that, of course, are not truly free. I sometimes use the ice cream analogy. Everybody would like government-provided ice cream every day, wouldn't you? I love ice cream. Wouldn't you like government-provided ice cream every day? Everybody wants it. Everybody likes it. But how many people would actually vote for it if they knew that it was going to cost them $1,000 a day to get the government-provided ice cream? Nobody would vote for that. Nobody would vote to pay $1,000 a day to get free ice cream, so-called free ice cream. So in addition to it not being an appropriate role of government, providing us ice cream, it's not free. It doesn't work. It's the least efficient way we could get ice cream would be to have the federal government provide it to us on a daily basis. But that's how we've gotten to $38 trillion in debt and a $2 trillion annual deficit, is people voting for free ice cream from the federal government. It's not sustainable in a constitutional republic. So we have a job to do, a responsibility as Americans. Our children, our grandchildren, and future generations are counting on us. So thanks for subscribing or listening to the Good for America podcast. Please remember to subscribe to the podcast, to rate the show, to refer it to your friends. Follow me on social media at Rep Bob Good. Let's keep the republic.